The knock on the cabin door thudded through the Montana night, swallowed and then thrown back by the mountains. Rain hammered the tin roof so hard the whole place seemed to vibrate. Dr. James Reynolds, a black neurologist turned mountain recluse, lowered his medical journal, a frown creasing his dark brown face. Nobody came this far into the woods after dark, not without a reason. When he opened the door, the reason stood right there on his front step. William Wilson, the pharmaceutical titan whose offers James had already rejected twice, loomed in the storm. Silver hair plastered to his forehead, suit jacket soaked through. But it wasn't the powerful CEO who held James's attention. It was the young woman in the wheelchair beside him, rain streaking down her lifeless features. Katherine Wilson, once the darling of the ballet world, now still from the waist down, her body a silent argument against every miracle headline James had ever read about spinal cord injuries. For a heartbeat, all three of them just stared at one another through the curtain of rain. Then James stepped aside. "Bring her in." William pushed the wheelchair over the threshold, water pooling on the worn wooden floor. Up close, Katherine looked younger than James expected, mid-20s, maybe 26, but her eyes were ancient with exhaustion. Her long hair hung in limp waves, her posture rigid from effort rather than grace. James, tall and solid, his locks pulled back at the nape of his neck, knelt so he was eye level with her. The firelight caught the warm undertones in his deep brown skin, softening the sharpness in his face. "Let me help her," he said quietly, as if the decision had already been made somewhere deep inside him. James Reynolds hadn't always lived halfway up a mountain, miles from the nearest town. 3 years earlier, he'd been the star name in neurology circles, the black doctor on conference posters and magazine covers, pioneering cutting-edge treatments for spinal cord injuries at Boston Medical Center. His colleagues called him bold, unconventional, even reckless. He preferred honest. His work blended advanced neuromodulation, neuroplasticity training, and alternative approaches his peers dismissed outright. But his outcomes had been undeniable. Patients other specialists had written off as permanently paralyzed left his program with tingling toes, returning sensation, sometimes even walking again. Articles labeled him a miracle worker. Hospital boards praised his dedication, grants flowed in. He spent his days in a blur of surgeries, research meetings, late-night rounds, and televised interviews. They all thought they knew what drove him. Ambition, prestige, the thrill of being the only black neurologist headlining those research panels. They were wrong. What kept him going wasn't applause. It was this quiet conviction that the human body could come back from almost anything if someone just refused to stop fighting for it. Then came the accident. One drunk driver, one slick stretch of highway, one ordinary Tuesday that ended with twisted metal and his wife Sarah's heart monitor flatlining while his own hands, the ones that had coaxed life back into failing nerves, could do nothing. The healer who couldn't heal his own. The media called it a tragedy when he walked away from his career at 39 and disappeared into the Montana wilderness with his 7-year-old daughter, Mia. The medical community called it a waste. James called it survival. Over the next 3 years, he built the cabin with his own hands. A compact, sturdy home with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Out back, the old barn became his refuge, a hybrid space that was half clinic, half research lab, outfitted not with sleek hospital chrome, but with equipment he'd bought at auction and modified himself. Out here, far from hospital politics and corporate boards that didn't look like him, he could still treat the occasional local patient and quietly refine his work on his own terms. Mia adapted to this life faster than he did. With her rich brown skin, big dark eyes, and a halo of tight curls that refused to be tamed by any hair tie, she became queen of the forest. She made friends with the magpies, the neighbor's dog, the creek behind the cabin. Homeschooled at the wooden table by the kitchen window, she devoured books and absorbed more emotional wisdom than many adults. Aside from monthly trips into town and the rare patient like tonight, she saw few people. But James had promised himself that however isolated they were, Mia would never feel alone. William Wilson, at 60, was used to walking into a room and feeling the air shift around him. His silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and meticulous suits signaled power before he even opened his mouth. He was the polished face of Wilson Pharmaceuticals, a global empire built on aggressive acquisitions and relentless expansion. Widowed when Katherine was 8, he poured his grief into growth. Where other men might have crumbled, he buried himself in quarterly reports and legal contracts, convinced that as long as he kept building, nothing could ever truly be lost again. He gave Katherine everything money could buy: elite private schools, world-class ballet training, a Manhattan penthouse with views that made people gasp. He paid for costumes, coaches, and galas. He wrote checks for celebrations and recitals. What he didn't give her was time. Their relationship became a series of wire transfers and proud speeches from the audience. He applauded from the dark while his assistant coordinated his exit to the next meeting. He knew the dates of every performance, but not the names of her friends. Then, 10 months earlier, the car accident had shattered more than Katherine's spine. For the first time in his life, William met a problem he couldn't bulldoze with cash. 8 specialists, 4 rehabilitation centers, and millions of dollars later, his daughter remained paralyzed, physically and emotionally. The bright, expressive dancer who once commanded the stage now stared past physical therapists like they were ghosts. Katherine had lived for dance. At 26, she'd become the youngest principal dancer at New York City Ballet, lauded for her precision and the raw vulnerability she brought to every role. The stage wasn't just where she worked, it was where she breathed. The crash didn't just take her ability to move, it stole the language she used to define herself. Her father called it perseverance when he booked yet another miracle rehabilitation center. Katherine called it denial. Each new doctor, each experimental regimen felt less like a chance and more like another way to fail. By the time the 8th neurologist pronounced the word permanent, something inside her shut down. James led them into the cabin, conscious of Katherine's damp clothes and distant stare. He gently maneuvered her wheelchair closer to the fireplace, adjusting the angle so the worst of the heat wouldn't sting her legs. Footsteps padded softly in the hallway. Mia peeked around this corner, clutching a well-loved teddy bear missing one eye. Her brown skin glowed in the firelight, tight curls framing her face. She studied the strangers, the older white man with worry carved into his features, and the young woman whose emptiness seemed heavier than her chair. "Mia, these are Mr. Wilson and Miss Katherine," James said, voice gentle. "They've come a long way to see us." William stepped forward, extending his hand. Even soaked, he carried himself like a man accustomed to boardrooms and private jets. Dr. Reynolds," he said, tone clipped but respectful. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I've followed your work for years. Your research on neuroplasticity and spinal cord injuries changed the field." James accepted the handshake, his expression neutral. "That feels like another lifetime now," he replied. "Please sit. You're both drenched." As he helped Katherine settle near the fire, William produced a thick folder from his briefcase, pages wrinkled from use. "Every test, every rehab program, every consultation is in here," he said. "The best specialists in the country have examined her, but—" His voice caught. "They've all said the same thing," Katherine cut in, her laugh brittle. "The grand conclusion is that I will never walk again. Let's not pretend this is anything but a last-ditch Hail Mary, Dad." She looked at James, chin lifting with defiance and resignation all at once. "I don't need your pity, Dr. Reynolds. I'm sure you have better ways to spend your time than dissecting one more hopeless case." Mia, apparently unfazed by the sharpness in Katherine's tone, walked forward. She gently set her teddy bear on Katherine's lap. "When I'm sad, Teddy helps," she said simply. "You can hold him if you want. The old gentleman looks really sad, too." For a second, something flickered across Katherine's face, a crack in the numbness. Her fingers moved almost of their own accord, brushing the worn fur. William watched, startled. It was the first hint of genuine reaction he'd seen from his daughter in months. James sat at the small table and opened the file, eyes scanning test results and imaging reports with practiced speed. He saw what every other specialist had seen: a severe spinal cord injury with a bleak prognosis. But he also noticed patterns they'd either missed or dismissed as insignificant. Her condition was brutal, yes. Irreversible, maybe not. The protocol he'd been developing before walking away from academic medicine might offer a chance at improvement. But he'd never finished formal trials. The ethics were messy, the risks were real, and the shadow of his greatest professional failure still followed him. He looked up, taking in Katherine's flat gaze, William's desperate energy, Mia's quiet hope. Maybe there was a reason they'd arrived on his doorstep in the middle of a storm. "I can't promise you a miracle," he said at last, closing the folder. "But I do believe there's potential for progress, with a very different kind of approach." William leaned forward immediately. "We'll do whatever it takes. Money is no object." James shook his head. "This isn't about money, Mr. Wilson. It's about commitment. The treatment I'm thinking of is intense, experimental, and demanding. If Katherine isn't fully invested, it won't work. It has to be her decision." He turned to Katherine. "This has to be your choice," he repeated. "Not your father's, not mine, yours." Katherine studied him, skepticism and curiosity warring in her eyes. "You're the first doctor who's asked what I want instead of telling me what I need," she said slowly. "Because healing starts with agency," James replied. "You've already lost control over so much of your body. I'm not going to take your choices away too." The silence that followed was broken by Mia's small voice. "Will the lady dance again?" she asked. The question hung in the air like something fragile and dangerous. James slipped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "We don't know yet, sweetheart," he said. "But we can try to help her find herself again, whether that includes dancing or not." For the first time in months, Katherine felt something other than grief or numbness. Not quite hope, but the faintest spark of wondering what tomorrow might hold. William rented a small cabin half a mile down the dirt road from James's property, insisting they stay close throughout the treatment. The boutique hotel in town would have been more comfortable, but he understood enough to know this journey required him to step into James's world, not drag James back into his. Every morning he drove Katherine up the muddy, rutted road to the converted barn that served as clinic and lab. Every afternoon he helped her back into the car, his expensive shoes ruined by gravel and pine needles, his perfectly curated life shrinking down to the distance between two cabins. The man who once scheduled his days in 15-minute blocks learned how long an hour could feel when you were measuring progress in millimeters and muscle twitches. James's methods looked nothing like the hospital rehab Katherine had grown to hate. Sessions began with meditation, helping her nervous system drop out of constant fight or flight. He moved with gentle precision, using his strong, dark hands not to force motion, but to coax communication between brain and body. He combined manual therapy with sensory integration, guided imagery, and neuroplasticity drills that felt more like puzzles than exercises. He sprinkled in elements from Eastern traditions some neurologists scoffed at. Most importantly, he spoke to Katherine like a collaborator, not a broken machine. He explained what he was doing and why, translating complex science into clear language, inviting her questions, respecting her intelligence. As a black doctor who'd been underestimated more times than he could count, he had no patience for talking down to people. Mia became an unexpected piece of the treatment plan. She sat nearby with her sketchbook, reading aloud or humming melodies Sarah used to play on the piano. Her presence softened the room's edges, turning grueling sessions into something almost normal. To Mia, a wheelchair was just something Katherine used, like glasses or a jacket, not a tragedy, not a failure, just part of who she was right now. "Can you teach me ballet?" Mia asked one afternoon, twirling in a tutu they'd made from one of James's old shirts. A flash of pain crossed Katherine's face. "I don't dance anymore, Mia." "Your hands still do," Mia pointed out, watching the way Katherine's fingers traced shapes in the air when she talked. "You could show me hand dancing." It was such a childlike reframe, Katherine almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she lifted her arms, demonstrating the positions of classical ballet from her wheelchair. First position, second, third, port de bras. Mia mirrored her movements with delight, stumbling and correcting herself, cheeks flushed with effort. The impromptu lessons became a ritual, stitching a thin, bright thread back to the artist Katherine had been. James often returned from setting up the next stage of treatment to find Mia attempting a wobbly arabesque, while Katherine adjusted her arm line, both of them laughing. William watched all this with a tangle of emotions he wasn't used to naming. At first, the sessions felt too unstructured for his taste. Where were the rigid protocols, the checklists, the progress charts he could present at board meetings? But as he saw his daughter actually engage with the exercises, with Mia, with life, he began to understand that not everything worth doing fit neatly into a spreadsheet. He took walks in the dense forest, the phone reception dropping to almost nothing. He thought of all the recitals he'd missed, the birthdays covered by business trips, the nights Katherine had gone to bed while he was still at the office chasing another deal. He thought about how often he'd tried to fix her life with elaborate gestures instead of simply showing up. Some evenings after Katherine had gone to bed, he joined James on the porch. They sat side by side, two very different men, one in designer casual wear, the other in worn jeans and a hoodie, sharing whiskey and silence as stars appeared over the dark ridgeline. You had everything, William said one night, staring into the distance. A prestigious career, groundbreaking research, international recognition. Why walk away from all of it? James turned the glass in his hand, watching the liquid catch the porch light. When Sarah died, he said, I realized I'd been living someone else's idea of success. 60-hour weeks, international conferences, papers with my name on them. Meanwhile, my wife and daughter were eating dinner without me most nights. He glanced back through the window where Mia slept curled around her teddy bear. The day after the funeral, she asked me if I was going to disappear too, he added softly. That was my line in the sand. William swallowed, his voice rough. Katherine used to call my assistant to schedule time with me, he admitted. I told myself I was building a future for her. Truth is, I was hiding in rooms where I felt in control. It's not too late, James said. She's still here, so are you. William, a man known for refusing to cry in public or private, blinked hard. For the first time in decades, his tears weren't for a stock price or a lost negotiation, but for all the moments he'd missed while chasing things he could measure. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into treatment. Katherine lay on the padded table, doing yet another round of the neural pathway drills James had designed. She'd learned not to expect miracles, to focus on following instructions and showing up. Then, in the middle of a breath, something changed. A faint electric tickle ran through her left big toe. She sucked in air, heartbeat spiking. Wait! James immediately paused. What is it? I felt something, she whispered, afraid to breathe too hard and scare it away. My toe, I felt something. He moved quickly but gently, retrieving a sensory tool and kneeling at her feet. Tell me the moment you feel anything, he said, even the lightest touch. He ran the instrument along the sole of her foot. There, she gasped, voice shaking. I felt that. William, reading at the corner, dropped his book and hurried over. What's happening? James continued his examination, face carefully controlled even as adrenaline hummed in his veins. The response was tiny, but it was real. Katherine's nerves were waking up. This is very promising, he said, emphasizing each word, but we need to be clear about what it means. Sensation returning doesn't guarantee full mobility. We're still right at the start of a very long road. Katherine barely heard the caution. For the first time in almost a year, hope didn't feel like an insult. It felt like oxygen. I want to keep going, she said, whatever it takes. That night, while James updated his notes in the lab, Mia wandered in, climbing into his lap like she'd done since she was a toddler. Is Katherine going to walk like in the pictures? She asked, studying a diagram of the spinal cord. I honestly don't know, James replied. Her injury is very serious. You look worried, Mia said. Is it because of the other person? James stilled. What other person, baby? The one before, Mia said. The one you tried to help like Mr. Wilson wants you to help Katherine. You told me they got better and then it went wrong. A chill traced James's spine. He rarely talked about that case, even in his own head. The patient who'd seemed to improve using an early version of James's method, only to develop severe complications later. The malpractice claim that had been settled quietly. The rumors about ethics that trailed him through hospital hallways. That was different, he said carefully. I've learned a lot since then. What neither of them noticed was Katherine, parked in the hallway, her wheelchair angled just out of sight. She'd come to thank James again for taking the risk with her, drawn by the murmur of his voice. The words she overheard froze her. Another patient. Complications, malpractice. Had she become his second chance? A way to fix his reputation with a miraculous success story? The next morning, she'd found something else that twisted the knife. While William showered, she opened his briefcase, searching for a pen. Instead, she found a thick document with the Wilson Pharmaceuticals logo on the front. It was a proposal, a detailed plan to acquire James's treatment protocols and research for commercial development. Projected market value, revenue forecasts, timelines for patent applications, public relations strategies for announcing a revolutionary new paralysis therapy. Her name appeared in neat bullet points, not as Katherine, but as Case Study A. There was no mention of long-term risks, no reminders of James's warnings, no emphasis on patient consent. Just phrases like disruptive market entry and dominant position in neuromedical space. Katherine's stomach rolled. Her progress wasn't a gift, it was a business opportunity. And James, was he in on it? Had those porch conversations just been negotiations she hadn't been invited to? When James walked into the clinic later that day, Katherine thrust the proposal at him. Is this why you agreed to treat me? She demanded. To package my recovery and sell it to my father? James's face drained of color as he skimmed the pages. I've never seen this, he said. This is not what William and I discussed. So you haven't been meeting with him every night, planning your big comeback with Wilson Pharmaceuticals behind you? Her voice shook. I thought you were different. Before he could answer, William stepped inside, senses immediately picking up on the tension. Is something wrong? He asked. Katherine held the proposal up like a weapon. Were you planning to tell me I'm just the test subject for your next acquisition, Dad? Or were you going to wait and let me find out at the press conference? William's expression shifted from confusion to defensiveness in seconds. This is a preliminary exploration, he said. Yes, I've discussed your treatment's potential with my team. That doesn't change the fact that you're improving. Your team? James cut in, anger flaring. You've been sharing details about Katherine's treatment with your company without my consent or hers? I'm trying to help people, William snapped. Your method could change thousands of lives, not just Katherine's. Why keep it buried in this cabin when it could be saving others? Because it's not ready, James shot back, his usual calm slipping. We don't fully understand the long-term effects yet. The last time I moved too fast, a man nearly died. Do you really want your daughter to be your company's test run? Katherine watched them argue over her, the familiar feeling of invisibility pressing down on her chest. Stop, she said, voice low. They didn't hear her. Stop, she repeated louder. Still nothing. Stop, she screamed. Both men froze. I am not your miracle, Dad, she said, shaking. And I'm not your redemption arc, Dr. Reynolds. I'm a person. I'm tired of my body being a battleground for your guilt and your ambition. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. I want both of you to leave me alone. William reached for her wheelchair. Katherine, please. No, she jerked away. Take me back to the cabin. I'm done being your experiment. James watched, helpless, as William wheeled her out. The old weight settled over his shoulders, the one that whispered he was dangerous when he tried to help. Mia appeared in the doorway, eyes wide and wet. Where are Mr. Wilson and Katherine going? She asked. Is it my fault? I talked about the other patient. James scooped her up, holding her close. This is not your fault, he said. Sometimes grown-ups make things messy that didn't need to be. That night, rain pounded the roof again, as if the mountain were replaying their first meeting in cruel reverse. James paced the lab, treatment plans spread across the table, years of work, the possibility of helping people like Katherine, all of it tangled with risk and regret. He'd come out here to protect his integrity. And his daughter. Had he just thrown both under a truck by letting William into their lives? Back at the rented cabin, Katherine watched lightning fork across the sky. The tingling in her toe returned, stronger now, accompanied by a strange buzzing sensation along her calf. Her body was still responding to the treatment, even as everything else fell apart. Katherine! William's voice came from the doorway, softer than she was used to hearing it. We need to talk. About what? She asked flatly. Share price projections, the ROI on my spinal cord. He walked in and sat down, hands locked together tightly. The CEO mask had slipped. In its place was a man who suddenly looked very, very human. I've spent my whole life believing if I had enough power, I could control outcomes, he began. When your mother left, I convinced myself I'd failed because I didn't have enough of it. So I promised that wouldn't happen again. I'd build something so big nothing could touch us. He exhaled shakily. Then the accident happened, he said, and I realized that for all my money and titles, I was helpless. Katherine studied him. For the first time, she saw not the empire builder, but the frightened father underneath, trying to buy his way out of feelings he didn't know how to face. So you tried to buy a solution, she said, voice less sharp now. Yes, he admitted, because it's the only tool I know. It wasn't just about business, Katherine. I wanted you to walk again so badly I could barely breathe. The proposal you found... My team pushed it faster than I should have allowed. You can't undo what happened, she said quietly, looking back at the storm. You can't buy back time or erase pain. The best you can do is learn to live with it differently. She thought of James, of how he'd never promised her a miracle, only honesty. That's what he's been teaching me, she added. How to fight for what can change and accept what can't. At the same hour, James sat at Sarah's old piano with Mia. They didn't play much anymore, but sometimes they just pressed the keys gently, letting the vibrations fill the silence. Tonight, he told her the full story of the patient from Boston, the one whose initial improvement had excited him so much he'd pushed the protocol faster than he should have, desperate to prove himself to skeptical colleagues. The man who'd later developed preventable seizures because James had chosen speed over caution. Did he die? Mia asked, blunt as always. No, James said, but he suffered things he shouldn't have had to. That's when I realized being right isn't the same as being responsible. Is that why you're scared to help Katherine now? She asked. He gave a sad little smile. Part of me is terrified of repeating my mistakes, he admitted, but another part knows I'm not the same man I was then. The treatment I'm using now is more refined, more careful. Then you should tell her that, Mia replied. She looked sad when she left, like she thought you didn't want to help anymore. Her simple observation cut through the noise in his head. He'd spent so much energy protecting himself from failure that he'd let Katherine walk away without fighting for her trust. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the mountains outlined sharply against a clean blue sky. James was flipping pancakes when another knock sounded at the door. This time when he opened it, Katherine sat there in her wheelchair, mud splattered on the wheels, jaw set. You shouldn't have come alone, he said instinctively. The road's a mess after last night's rain. I didn't, she replied, nodding toward the yard. A teenager in a baseball cap leaned against a modified ATV nearby, giving James a quick nod. I paid Dylan to bring me, Katherine said. Money is occasionally useful for things other than buying people. There was a wryness in her tone that sounded a lot like an olive branch. Do you want to come in? James asked. Mia will be thrilled to see you. Later, Katherine said. First, I want to see the real lab, not just the treatment room. I want to understand exactly what you're doing to me and why. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. You're entitled to that. He thanked Dylan and promised to handle the ride back, then wheeled Katherine around to the converted barn. Inside, the lab didn't look like the slick, glass-walled facilities she'd trained in for commercials. It was organized, yes, but in a deeply personal way. Treatment tables James had built himself, shelves holding a mix of standard medical supplies and carefully labeled jars of natural compounds, walls covered in anatomical diagrams, patient charts, and handwritten notes pinned up beside peer-reviewed articles. This is where you develop the treatment? She asked. Yes. He pointed to a large timeline taped along one wall. After I left Boston, I stripped the whole thing down to first principles. This shows the process, what we tried, what failed, where things went wrong, and how we adjusted. She followed the line with her eyes, noticing a marked section labeled simply failure. Underneath, James had scribbled dense notes about what had gone wrong with his earlier patient. There were arrows pointing to new safety measures, revised dosages, longer observation windows. She saw the painstaking effort he'd poured into making sure history didn't repeat itself. "You've been more careful with me," she said. "I had to be," he answered, "not just because of my past, but because—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Because I care what happens to you, Katherine, not as a data point, as a person." She let that sit between them. "Did you know about my father's plans to commercialize all this?" she asked finally. "No," James said. "If I'd known, we'd have had a very different conversation on day one. Your father sees the world through systems and scale. He truly believes helping one person is good, but helping thousands is better." "And you don't?" she challenged. I do," he said, "but not at the expense of the one person sitting in front of me. I'd rather get it right with you than rush into a pipeline that chews people up." He held her gaze. "I want to keep treating you," he added, "not for your father's approval or to clear my reputation, because you deserve every chance this work can give you. That's the only part of this I care about." Before she could respond, Mia burst through the door, stopping abruptly when she saw Katherine. Katherine, you came back!" she squealed, then caught herself and stayed a respectful distance from the wheelchair, just like James had taught her. "Are you still going to teach me ballet?" The simple question toppled the last of Katherine's defenses. To this child, she wasn't a lawsuit or a miracle story. She was a teacher. "Yes," Katherine said, voice steadier than she felt. "If you still want me to." "Good," Mia grinned. "I've been practicing my hand dancing." Later that day, while Katherine demonstrated arm positions and Mia did her best to copy them, William's car pulled into the gravel drive. James stepped out onto the porch, bracing himself for another battle. But when William emerged, something was different. The sharp CEO edges were dulled. He wore jeans and a simple sweater, not armor in the shape of a suit. "She's inside with Mia," James said. "She came on her own this morning." William nodded, visible relief loosening his shoulders. "I'm not here to drag her back," he said. "I'm here to speak with you." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it over. Inside is a document formally relinquishing any claim Wilson Pharmaceuticals might someday make on your research, he said. "I've shut down the patent exploration and market analysis. Permanently." James opened the envelope carefully, scanning the legal language. "What changed?" he asked. "Katherine," William answered simply. "She was right about me. I've spent her whole life trying to acquire solutions instead of being one. I don't want to own your work, Dr. Reynolds. I want to support it." "What does that mean exactly?" James asked. "A foundation," William said, "separate from my company, dedicated to advancing your methods on your terms. You'd keep full control of the science. I'd provide funding and help navigate regulators and manufacturers when you're ready for scale." James eyed him. "And what do you get in return?" William's jaw worked, his blue eyes damp. "A chance to use what I've built for something that matters more than quarterly earnings," he said. "A way to help my daughter without trying to control her. Maybe a shot at becoming the kind of man she can respect." Inside, oblivious to the conversation outside, Katherine was telling Mia about the way music felt in her bones when she used to dance, how phrases lived in her body long after the performance ended. "Do you still want to dance even if your legs don't work right now?" Mia asked. "I'll always be a dancer," Katherine answered. "Maybe not on a big stage anymore, but dance is how I make sense of the world. That doesn't go away." "Daddy says that about Mommy's music," Mia replied quietly. "He says even when she's not here, she's still teaching us." Katherine smiled, a real one that reached her eyes. Maybe her identity hadn't been shattered so much as shifted into a shape she didn't recognize yet. Sensation continued to crawl higher up her legs, slow and stubborn. For once, she found herself less obsessed with the question of walking and more curious about who she was becoming in the process. When James and William stepped back into the cabin together, Katherine looked up sharply. The air between them had changed. The tension was still there, but it had softened into something that looked like an understanding. "Dad?" she asked, wary. William knelt in front of her wheelchair, mirroring what James had done that first rainy night. "I'm not taking over Dr. Reynolds' work," he said. "I'm stepping back. He'll explain the details, but I wanted you to hear it from me first." James unfolded the document. "Your father wants to create a foundation that would fund this research and help other patients access it," he said. "I'd keep full control of the methods. No corporate ownership, no rush to market." He looked straight at her. I won't agree to anything without your blessing, he added. You're not just my patient anymore. You're part of this. Katherine looked from one man to the other, the father who had spent too long loving her with conditions attached, and the doctor who had almost run from her to avoid repeating history. On one condition, she said at last, the foundation doesn't carry either of your names. It's named after Sarah Reynolds, and it guarantees treatment for people who can't afford anything like what we've had here. James's breath caught at the mention of his late wife. William nodded immediately. Done. Mia, who had been watching from the couch, clapped her hands. Does that mean Katherine and Mr. Wilson are staying? She asked. James smiled, ruffling her curls. Yeah, baby, he said. They're staying. 1 year later, the Sarah Reynolds Foundation for Neurological Recovery opened its doors in a renovated ranch house just outside town. It wasn't flashy. No glass atriums, no marble floors, just wide hallways, sunlit rooms, and equipment chosen for function rather than aesthetics. A staff of 6 therapists, all trained personally by James, worked under his guidance as medical director. Katherine, now able to stand and take supported steps using sleek carbon fiber braces and a frame James had designed, served as patient advocate. She met with families, explained what to expect, and made sure their emotional needs weren't crushed under the weight of medical jargon. William split his time between running Wilson Pharmaceuticals remotely and serving on the foundation's board. He used his contacts to navigate regulatory red tape and secure additional funding, but every Thursday afternoon his calendar was blocked out with one non-negotiable task: attending ballet class. In the modest studio they'd added onto the back of the building, Katherine taught adaptive dance to patients and local kids. Mia, now a confident 8-year-old, was her star student. The foundation decided to celebrate its first anniversary with a small event. Nothing grand, just patients, families, staff, and a few townspeople whose lives had become intertwined with the place. It also happened to coincide with a personal milestone. After 18 months of relentless therapy, setbacks, tears, tiny victories, and endless repetitions, Katherine was ready to show what her body could do now. The main therapy room was transformed into a makeshift performance space. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle. Soft lights washed the walls in warm gold. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation. William sat in the front row, flanked by James and Mia. The unlikely friendship between the black doctor and the white CEO had grown into something solid, forged in late-night strategy sessions and shared worry for the same young woman. When the room fell silent, Katherine appeared in the doorway, hands gripping the handles of a sleek black walking frame. She wore a simple ballet practice dress. Even with the adaptive equipment, her posture screamed dancer. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune, Sarah's favorite, floated through the room. Katherine moved slowly into the center of the space. Each step was hard-won, a negotiation between mind, nerves, and muscle. What her legs couldn't yet fully express, her upper body poured into the air, arms carving shapes with the same fluidity that had once captivated audiences at Lincoln Center. Halfway through, Mia joined her, bare feet whispering against the floor. The child orbited her teacher, mirroring Katherine's arm movements, spinning where Katherine held steady. Together, they created a duet, Katherine's grounded strength and Mia's light, spinning joy. At the end of the piece, on a breath nobody dared take, Katherine let go of the frame. For 5 long seconds, she stood unaided, arms lifted in 5th position high above her head, every muscle trembling, eyes locked on James. Then his hands were there, steadying her, and the room erupted. There wasn't a dry eye anywhere. William clapped until his palms ached, tears running openly down his face. James felt something unclench in his chest that he hadn't even known he'd been holding. Later, when the chairs had been pushed aside and people milled around with paper plates and plastic cups, James found Katherine on the back porch. The mountains were silhouettes against the deepening sky. You were extraordinary, he said, joining her at the railing. Sarah would have loved what you did with her song. Katherine smiled, a small true curve of her lips that had become more common over the past year. I choreographed it for her, she said. For the woman whose work helped give me back pieces of myself I thought were gone. The research was mine, he said gently, but the courage, he shook his head, that was all you. And the stubbornness was Dad's, she added, laughter in her voice, nodding toward the window. Inside, William was surrounded by kids, producing coins from behind ears and making cards appear from nowhere. His once intimidating presence had softened into something almost grandfatherly. Who would have guessed we'd end up here? Katherine murmured. James followed her gaze. He thought back to that first stormy night, the knock on the door, the wheelchair in the rain, the words that had changed all their lives. Let me help her. Some healing doesn't show up on scans, he said quietly. Sometimes the biggest transformation is in what we learn about ourselves along the way. Katherine nodded. She'd found new purpose as an advocate and teacher. She'd rebuilt a relationship with her father, not as a patron, but as a parent. She'd grown close to Mia and James in a way that felt almost like family, one chosen through shared effort and vulnerability. Mia burst onto the porch, breathless. Katherine, Mr. Wilson is teaching everyone the magic coin trick, she announced. You have to come see. He keeps dropping them on the floor. Katherine laughed, letting Mia tug her hand while James steadied her on the other side. As they stepped back into the warm light of the Foundation's common room, past patients trading stories of tiny victories, past families who no longer felt alone, Katherine realized something. Her paralysis hadn't been the end of her story. It was a chapter. A brutal one, yes, but not the last. The life she was building now wasn't defined by what she'd lost, but by what she'd found. Community, purpose, a father who was finally learning how to show up, a black doctor who'd found the courage to practice again without losing his soul, and a little girl whose joy tied them all together. Some injuries never fully heal, some dreams have to be rewritten in new forms, but here, in this place, they'd built together, surrounded by people who understood that healing meant more than walking. Katherine felt whole in a way she never had, not even at the height of her career. Outside, the Montana twilight settled gently over the ranch. Inside, laughter and music spilled into the hallway. And for the first time, that sound felt like a promise, not just for her, but for everyone who would walk, roll, or be carried through these doors in the years to come.